Welcome to the Aesthetic Business Masters podcast, the show that brings together the brightest minds in aesthetics, business, and beyond. This is the show where strategy meets soul and business growth is powered by passion, purpose, and people. Whether you're a clinic owner, cosmetic nurse, or beauty entrepreneur, this is the space to hear inspiring stories, learn practical business insights, and stay at the forefront of the aesthetic industry. Let's get into it. Today's episode is one you'll want to take notes on because we're joined by a digital marketing powerhouse, Safwan Condry from Online Marketing Gurus. Saf is an experienced strategist who helps massive global brands like Vodafone, Calvin Klein, Foot Locker, Dermalogica, Universal Music, and even Macquarie University generate millions of dollars in revenue through smart, scalable, and results-driven marketing. But what makes Saf truly special is that he can break down big brand strategies and make them work for you, whether you're running a boutique skin clinic, medi-spa, or multi-site practice. So let's dive in. Hello and welcome again, Saf. I'm so excited to have you here today and to learn all about digital marketing. And I think to kickstart, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and how you became a digital marketing specialist.
Absolutely. Hey, everyone. Back from Online Marketing Gurus. First of all, thanks for having us today. Really excited for this podcast. So look, my history with digital marketing actually now goes back quite a number of years. I've been in this space for about 8-9 years roughly. And it actually happened a bit by chance. So the co-founders of the business and I went to university together. And one of the co-founders, I'd look at kind of TVs that I really wanted to get, but couldn't afford back when I was a student at JB. And then another co-founder, we used to actually go to the gym together as well. So it just kind of happened by chance. So my original path was through the corporate landscape, looking at banking and legal and things like that. But yeah, I just found this so much more interesting. So kind of jumped in when the business was still growing. And from there, you know, we've had the great fortune of scaling quite significantly over time.
You really have. So you've worked with some really big brands, and reading your bio, it's extremely impressive. But we're talking to an audience of clinic owners, small business owners, maybe chain clinics, obviously specifically in the aesthetic medical space. What are some of the biggest digital marketing mistakes that you see in this space? And do you have familiarity working in the aesthetic industry?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, like a lot of the times the brands that we mentioned, I think the big takeaway from there is that a lot of the learnings and IP that we've developed as a business and our know-how, we get to test it out on some of these bigger brands. And that allows us to then share those insights across a myriad of different industries. But a lot of the tactics used for different brands actually still apply no matter the industry. But I think one thing that's really exciting is that we actually have a significant amount of experience when it comes to the kind of aesthetic space. So for example, if you're going down the kind of clinic or specialist type of space, we helped Evolution Laser take on Laser Clinics Australia about 6-7 years ago. We've been working with them for a while. Just Google laser hair removal Sydney, look in position 1. We're ranking there, which is really cool. We've helped a number of clinics in the fat freezing space scale over the years, starting from body catalyst, body sculpting clinics, and now elite body contouring. We've worked with plastic surgeons, worked with medical manufacturers like ResMed, Cochlear. So quite a whole range of different brands, which has then given us a lot of insights into what works. And what might surprise you is that when you look at a lot of clinics, the tactics are heavily local. And when you're thinking local, you probably think examples that I share from companies like Jim's Cleaning Group and Avis Budget Group have nothing to do with what you do, but it's ironically very, very similar when you're looking at that local approach. So, Nick, to answer your other question around specifically what are the mistakes that we often see, I'd say it's 3 things, right? Number 1 is taking a really ad hoc approach to marketing. So a lot of the times we'll see people just kind of test something out, throw it out in the waters, put a little bit of money in it, see how it goes. But the challenge with that is it ends up with a lot of wastage in terms of budget, right? So when you're looking at things like, say, boosted posts, oftentimes the end goal is to get a booking, but it doesn't really translate into those bookings, which can then frustrate owners. Other things that we'll see is that just, put a little bit of money into Google Ads for a month or two. But the issue is if you've got a brand new fresh account, you end up not, the expectation versus the outcome doesn't always match. So I think it's always good to have like a plan of attack in mind and then understand, okay, maybe I'm happy with the leads I'm getting with the business. And my goal is how do I prepare so that, 6 to 12 months from now, I can have a steady stream of business coming through. That might be one option. Another one might be I've just started and I need to get bookings immediately. So you need to really understand kind of what your objective is. And then from there, what are the best approaches to take in order to really kind of see the channel through and looking at kind of driving that scale and growth. The second mistake we'll find is often just relying on referrals alone if your goal is to really grow your practice. And I think that, first of all, referrals are always the best source of leads for any business, right? And I'm not here to refute that. But the challenge is that with referrals, a lot of the time, it's difficult to forecast, if I would ask you a question 8 months from now, how many referrals would you expect? It's sometimes quite difficult to answer that question. So we've taken a couple of business like body sculpting clinics from 2, 3 locations to 8, 10 locations, which then requires a lot of leads to support that growth. So if your goal is around growth, then purely relying on referrals can be a limiting factor. The third mistake we'll often see is not giving it enough time, right? So what I mean by that is if for, maybe whatever reason you decide to look at digital marketing and it might be, an immediate needs driven thing. Maybe it might be curiosity, but if you end up doing the exercise for only say 4 to 8 weeks, it's not really giving the channel enough time to really show what it's capable of. The unfortunate thing is with things like say Google ads and social media platforms like Meta or TikTok and so forth, in the early phases of the campaign, is some of, unfortunately, the worst performing times because your account's going through learning phase. The platforms are trying to understand how to deliver ads. They haven't been optimized. So it can sometimes be demoralizing in terms of the actual execution side of things when you're not seeing that coming through quickly. But I think that's where having the right expectations going into it is really good. So if you know beforehand, like, okay, I'm willing to commit, XYZ dollars over the next 3 months, 6 months, whatever it might be, you're then setting yourself.
Oh my goodness, you've raised so many good points and it's so true. I mean, I think every clinic owner is guilty of sometimes thinking, I haven't posted in a week or 2 weeks, so I better quickly throw something out and then
That's
just
it.
grab whatever you can for the sake of literally posting something. And then on the flip side, we tend to not do anything. Like when I say we, all business owners, until it's too late.
Yeah.
So it's like, I've got no bookings next week. Crap, I need to do some marketing, as opposed to, like you said, forecasting, planning, and committing to a long-term goal. So for a clinic owner, how do they create a strategy and a plan? Where to start?
Yeah. So I think it's a really good question. I think the first thing to think about is realistically, what are my objectives and how long am I looking to accomplish those objectives in? So, that could vary from, okay, I've just started. I need to get bookings through immediately. In that instance, your number one thing is like, first of all, aside from referrals, do you have a website? Does the website have call to action, a way to get in touch and make a booking? Like whether it's as simple as just putting a phone number if you don't necessarily have the budget to implement a booking system. Number two, if your goal is short term and you really need bookings quickly, what's your local presence look like at the moment? Even simple things like, for example, finding local community groups, like they're free things that you could do to stimulate that activity as well as paid opportunities. I would say that based on our experience, we find that Google still tends to be the strongest channel when it comes to driving intent oriented leads. Whereas with social, it can be sometimes a little bit of hit and miss. What I mean by that is it can generate traffic, but that person may not necessarily be immediately looking for a solution. Whereas if someone is typing in, a term like say laser hair removal, Atarman or near me or something like that, they're telling Google specifically that they're interested in that. And some stats that might surprise you about Google is that 46% of all Google searches are actually local, which might be quite surprising. But if you think about your day-to-day behavior, you might connect like, oh, I didn't realize just how much local searches I'm doing. And then 64% of local customers use the search engines essentially as their directory to find local businesses. So I'm old enough to remember the days of the yellow pages, but times, in this day and age, like regardless of kind of the younger audience or 50 plus, when it comes to local, they go to Google when it comes to search. And 78% of local business, like local mobile searches actually results in an offline purchase. So yeah, having that local visibility, super, super important. And then I guess the final area to think about is, maybe you're not ready for investing in areas like Google. There are opportunities around looking at kind of local business partnerships that you could have to kind of cross promote in terms of social media itself. You could make things like organic postings. I think the important thing to remember is that approach is a very, very long play. And what you're looking to do there is build up a reputation of trust, the brand identity, your personality. It won't necessarily convert into leads immediately. Over time, it can be built into an asset that does drive that. But yeah, I think the important thing is to really understand, what am I looking to achieve? And then matching the right kind of channel that you then pursue based on that goal.
Absolutely. And I often speak to marketers through clinics or through B2B businesses that I work with, and they either tell me that they don't take on new businesses, so they only do businesses that are established and doing really well, or they focus more on retaining their current clients. So, more inbound marketing. It's very hard to find a good marketer who will help with that really, bricks and mortar, starting the business, or somebody that could be, for instance, injecting for the last 20 years but never done any marketing, someone who wants to scale from nothing, or, as you mentioned earlier, generate leads quite quickly.
Yeah.
What would you say would Google be the best place to start to generate leads?
Look, I would say that it is the best place for one key reason, which is intent. When people are on Google, there's intent with that behavior. Again, I'm not saying that social doesn't work or can't work, but there's a lot of elements in play in social which can be quite time consuming. So, let's say that that individual for, a reason like that's maybe not related directly to the business has a large following already. Of course, there's ways that you can leverage that audience to then create that demand. But if you're in a situation where, you have no kind of existing social following and you're just starting the business and you're looking to get the business flowing through, I'd say that, outside of things like referrals or potential walk-in traffic, the main way to drive that kind of intent oriented of people who are, ready to actually buy and engage in your services, it does unfortunately come down to Google. Like, and I say unfortunately because it really gives Google quite a lot of power, and that power then means that there's competition, and that competition can then increase the cost that you're looking at. But for example, one idea around how you could start off initially is, rather than like targeting all of, say, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Perth, wherever you might be, tackle just your local area of the suburbs around you. Like, that's a really dramatic way to bring down the costs that you have by just limiting that exposure to a couple of areas that you have. And I'm talking in the scale of maybe like a 60-70% reduction in cost.
Goodness me, I totally agree with what you said earlier about Google, and I'm digressing, and local searches, because I local search everything all the time. And one of the things I found, which was quite surprising, was with doing the Aesthetic Business Masters, I wanted to take an actual printed invite to all of the, clinics in my area, because there's quite a lot, and I'm near a private hospital, so there's bucket loads of clinics.
Yeah, cool.
And funnily enough, when I Googled, cosmetic injectors near me, not a lot came up, and there was no, do you know what I mean? There was no Google profiles or anything like that. But whereas on social, they're just, posting 3 times a day, and it's crazy, and they're more responsive through a message on social. But then when I speak to these clinic owners, they're telling me they're not getting anything out of their social, and they're spending hours and hours and hours on creating content. What would you suggest people do to start with Google if they're not ready to jump into, spending thousands of dollars on it? SEO just feels so smoke and mirrors, when you don't understand something.
Yeah, look, I think one of the great things is the sessions that we have coming up that we'll speak about will actually show you the tools that we use, the reason behind why we do things, and actually show you things you could practically implement yourself in terms of the SEO side of things. There's some elements that can be tricky to do yourself, but there are some basics that can be done yourself, and we'll show that during kind of the upcoming session. We do have like guides to doing these things on our website in the OMG Academy section as well. But look, to give you kind of a quick answer, I'd say look at things like building up your customer reviews. There are elements around just your Google My Business profile, which you can do yourself. Things like, for example, there's opportunities to add. There's a Q&A section, and the problem is most businesses, no one asks any questions, but you actually have the opportunity to pre-populate those questions and then put answers. You can then, reach out to partners maybe that you work with, ask them to then link to your site as well to kind of help with Google understanding the popularity of the site. So there are certain things that you can do yourself. But another option that you could look at is also when it comes to things like Google Ads. Let's say, for example, you look at targeting suburbs that are within let's say 3 to 5 kilometer radius. I call it the, can't be bothered radius in terms of like how far someone might be willing to go for a standard type of treatment. But, that could be a really great way to keep cost in that, say, even like say $1,000 a month type of ad spend level rather than like, going into the tens of thousands and breaking the bank. So I think that, what it comes down to is adjusting your expectations and then making sure that you're taking real steps that match those expectations. I think that when it comes to the social posts, a lot of the frustration may be that if the thinking there is I make these posts and I'm going to get customers out of it immediately, it's not the right approach. Whereas the way I would see it is that here's a digital real-time billboard for my business. When even if someone kind of finds you through Google, right? There's a high chance they're going to go through your social and look at things like what's that brand identity, personality, what kind of expertise do they have? A huge amount of it is probably going to be looking at client testimonials and before and afters and things like that. So think about, okay, if I was a potential customer, what are the things would be the objections that I have before I then engage in a new clinic? And how can I then put content that, helps ameliorate some of those concerns, right? So yeah, I'd say like the big things to focus on would be things like what kind of maybe training the staff has. Like there's a very wide degree of training from what I've seen for a lot of these procedures, thinking about things like, customer testimonials before and afters. Put in that type of content because it's going to help like anyone who then is exposed to the brand have an opportunity to like, potentially become that end customer.
Yes, it's really hard for anyone who's APRA registered because they can't use testimonials. It's against the, the APRA and TGA guidelines, which makes it really challenging for anyone who, is APRA registered or even who owns a clinic that's APRA registered.
Yeah.
But one of the other big questions that always comes up is, do I spend hours and hours and hours making my feed look beautiful and perfectly curated, or do I just post?
Again, I think it comes down to having that plan beforehand and the reason behind having that plan beforehand, which is sometimes easier said than done. And I think that even if it means that every single post isn't curated, have a goal in mind around what you're looking to achieve from that. What I would say is if the goal is to drive bookings, when we're looking at tactics around advertising, like paid media advertising on Facebook and Instagram, which does still work really well in this industry, it's quite separate from the actual page itself. So the type of messaging on the page is more around non-salesy educational content. Whereas that salesy messaging that might be tempting to do, it's best to reserve a lot of that for the ads. So when you're then thinking about like what kind of posts you're doing, really emphasize more on things like the team, the expertise, the procedures, even things like the personality. Like a lot of the times when people are looking at this, they're trying to see do the clinicians, do they resonate to, who I like dealing with? And that could be something that pushes someone to then working with you.
And is there a particular platform that you recommend focusing on? Like, should people be doing TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn?
Yeah. So this is actually something we get asked pretty often, especially kind of with the rise of platforms like TikTok. And I'd say the answer is it depends on your business. And so what I mean by that is for a lot of the businesses, they don't have the kind of content that actually resonates on TikTok. And there's like TikTok specific content. And the answer is like, if you don't have that type of content, I don't know if I would necessarily recommend focusing on it. And when I say TikTok content, if you're immediately thinking like, okay, what does that mean? It's probably not the right fit for your business as well. The other thing to keep in mind with platforms like TikTok is that in terms of the demographics, if we look at Australian users, TikTok will say 18 plus, but in reality, let's say if your target market is a 13 to 20-year-old, woman roughly, then it works really well. Like we've had a lot of success with brands like Stacks, for example, which is a women's activewear and apparel business on TikTok. But a big part of it is having like that TikTok oriented content. And then the second thing is before you start seeing actual ROI coming from the channel, even if you've got a, mid-size or mid-size plus established brand, you often actually need to go into the red for quite a substantial time. Like for example, for Stacks, we were, delivering like negative ROI or losses for about 5-6 months, building up the audiences before we got it to a level where it was generating about 7 to 8 kind of in terms of return. In terms of platforms like Instagram, we find that it's really effective for remarketing or retargeting. So these are ads that follow people around the web. So once they've seen you from whatever source it may be, having that ad follow users around the entire web is really, really helpful. But Instagram tends to work really well when it comes to that approach. Instagram's ads, again, we find from a conversion or lead generation perspective for now, when it comes to the aesthetic kind of industry, still not as strong as Facebook. And I think that there's a number of reasons behind that. But when you're looking at a lot of these procedures, there is sometimes some education involved. Like, for example, if someone's looking at RFI or microdermabrasion or something like that, it may be the first time they've ever looked at that particular procedure. And when you're looking at platforms like Facebook, people actually engage with the text that's in that ad. Whereas when it comes to Instagram, there's the majority of people are not reading that kind of end text. And typically when we're looking at the end conversion outcome, we still find Facebook to be the top performer. The good news is Facebook, Instagram are both from the same platform. So you can then, maybe for some reason your brand performs better on one channel or the other, but you can then test that out. But I'd say overall, we find Facebook tends to be the strongest performer still.
And do you recommend or ever promote various AI platforms for scheduling and for doing your SEO or putting together your social content?
So there was actually an update from Google exactly about this in January this year. So just a couple of months ago. And from an SEO perspective, if you like literally just type in a prompt, copy and paste that copy and then put it on your website, first of all, like platforms like Google, Microsoft, they can detect it very, very easily, whether it's AI generated. But then number two, that impacts the website negatively. So the question might then be, how do I utilize AI in terms of like my business, right? So the way to do it is more to do the research, create, let's say, kind of the first draft or find a bit more information about the target audience. And then from there, curate that content and then, create your own out of that content. So Google has said that they're okay with it being used in a way that drives value. But if you're purely just copy and pasting and putting it in, it's not doing you any benefit. So then your question might be, okay, how do I do that? Right. So for example, let's say that your business let's say it's in fat freezing, since we've been talking about that a little bit. So questions that people might have might be around things like, is it safe? How long does it take before I see results? What things can I do to prepare in advance? How do I best take care of it afterwards? What are the types of machinery and the qualifications behind the machinery, things like that. So let's say that maybe even though you know that in your head, you might not think, okay, from my website, what do I need to write? You can just ask, what are common questions and concerns people may have before booking in their first cryolipolysis session? And then you'll find the AI will probably outline like some of the things that I've just spoken to you about. And then from there, when it gives those answers, you can then explore that further. I think that, a lot of people are familiar with ChatGPT, but also test out tools like Perplexity, which will give you a little bit different results as well. It pulls a lot of results from like social and Reddit as well, which can be quite helpful. And then there's also but look, there's quite a few tools out there, but I'd say Perplexity is a really, really good one, particularly if you're looking at helping it generate social posts for you. Like it's a really good way to get it started. But yeah, look, I'd say use a couple of tools. If you want something like a little bit more flowy, there's a tool called Claude, Claude, that you could use. If you're looking for something that's just giving you the answer, ChatGPT. If you're looking for something in between, Perplexity.
Oh my goodness, we're going to be so lucky. We're all going to need our notepads and pens, the Melbourne and Sydney Aesthetic Business Masters for all these notes.
I've got a couple of examples actually, so I'm pretty excited to go through the presentation I put together for everyone. But we've actually got real examples of how like we use those tools as well. So I think that the session will kind of elaborate a little bit.
Fantastic. And I think every second person in this industry has had a dodgy marketer. Yeah, unfortunately. So what do you recommend for a clinic owner to, like, how do they manage their marketing if they're engaging someone externally? How do they know, apart from obviously having appointments booked, that their marketing is working?
And I think that maybe a side question that I'm kind of reading in between the lines here is, how do you make sure that your agency you select isn't one of those dodgy ones as well? And then the second part of that question is, okay, now that I've got an agency, how do I make sure that they're actually, performing or making that progress towards like the end outcome that we're looking to reach, right? So I think the first question in terms of how to select the right agency, look, a few things could be just looking at things like credentials. So, not only are they a Google partner, because a lot of companies are Google partners, but what tier of partner are they? So there's things like, say, Google Premier Partner, which is reserved for only about the top 10% of agencies. So that's something. There's also, similar credentials for Meta Business Premium Partner, TikTok Preferred Partner. But I would say like the biggest thing in my opinion is like, ask them to show you an example that you can Google yourself. Like, if I tell you like Google laser hair removal Sydney, you can do that yourself. Look in position 1 and you'll see evolution there, right? Google fat freezing Sydney and you'll see elite body contouring ranking there as well. So there is some like merit to just old school, just show me the result that I can tangibly see. So I'd look at that. I'd look at things like case studies as well in terms of the end outcome, familiarity with the industry as well. So there are a lot of regulations depending on the segment that you're serving as well. So some things that you'd normally do wouldn't work, but then conversely from an SEO perspective, and we'll go into this in a lot more depth in the session, but there are particular things that you can do in your content that then helps show authority to Google around, the subject matter, and that helps from a ranking perspective. So I'd look at things like that. And then the second aspect around how to make sure that the agency is like actually kind of doing the work and on track. Again, I think it's simple. Like it comes down to asking, what type of reporting do I have? What type of points of contact do I have? How regularly do we catch up? Is that person local as well? I'm not saying local is the only one, like only people who are based physically in Australia can do the work properly, but it can allow you to then have that additional peace of mind, around the quality of work that you're getting done. Ask questions around like, what kind of reporting and dashboards do we have? So this is actually something that we thought really hard about. I'd say about 5-6 years ago. A big challenge we ran into for the business is that it's a lot simpler with Google ads and Facebook ads, where within 4 months, you can very realistically, tangibly see the impact. But something like SEO, depending on what you're going after, it can take like 6 or even like 10 to 12 months to see outcomes, given that until you're on page one, there's no leads coming through or any traffic coming through. So what we then thought about is, okay, how do we best communicate the work that's being done and the value that's being driven? And so things that we've come up with for our business, for example, is we've created like a mobile app. So even if you're not tech savvy, you can pull out your phone and at a glance, you can then see what kind of work is being done at the moment. Like what are the tasks that have been completed? What kind of year on year, month on month growth am I seeing in traffic, in leads, click through rate, cost per acquisition, these kinds of metrics. So yeah, I think that ask the open-ended question around, can you show me any examples, success that you've delivered in my industry or something similar? And then what type of communication and reporting will I see ongoing? I think those will cover your bases for the most part. And you'll get a gut feel, when you hear that answer. Like if someone immediately gives you the answer, it's probably okay. Whereas if someone's having to think really hard about it, even if they give you the answer you want to hear, it may not be legit.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And goodness me, you've given us so much information. I'm kind of feeling like maybe I shouldn't keep asking questions. But I noticed in your bio that you helped Dermalogica,
Yeah.
and that is a huge, well-known brand
Mhm.
in our industry. Can you walk us through, how you managed to help them and
Yeah.
increase their ROI?
Yeah, absolutely. So this was about, what was it? Maybe 4 years ago, right? And we worked with them for about 3 years roughly. And look, the main challenge they had at that point in time when they reached out to us was there is a lot of resellers that they cannot control the messaging or discounting from. So what I mean by that is, aside from physical retail, there are players like Adore Beauty who, have a very massive presence in the industry. Dermalogica is a bit of a different brand to the typical skincare brand in that they're actual aesthetic experts, and that kind of cosmeceutical kind of aspect plays a really, really large role. So the goals that had were a couple. Like number one, how do we make sure that we are not losing out more and more of our sales, not only the end sales, but the brand interaction? Let's make sure we're not losing that out to someone like, a Sephora or a, Mecca or a Adore Beauty was actually the big one that they were concerned about. But then at the same time, we want to not show that we're competing against them all the time. So that's also like a bit of a challenge where they don't want to show that they're going against the wills of the distributors, but at the same time, they want to make sure that they own and control that message rather than being one brand and a grid of all these other different brands, right? So the solution was a couple of things. Number one, in terms of SEO, we looked at kind of a myriad of terms. Some terms were around basics, like say, for example, I'd say things like, moisturizers and these basic terms. The market's changed a little bit and it become a lot more educated over that kind of COVID period and the rise of brands like Ordinary. And so we looked at things like vitamin C serum, L-ascorbic acid, or, the technical term around vitamin C. We looked at things like hyaluronic acid, which seems to be in like literally every product these days, but we would look at a lot of these actives. We also would look at the symptoms that someone might be looking to resolve. So things like skin barrier repair cream or creams for treating eczema, things like that. So we really broadened the horizon where a lot of their traffic was coming just from branded terms, like looking at either Dermalogica or searching for kind of some of their top search products specifically. We then expanded that to looking at a lot more of the generic. So that was kind of number one around getting the brand presence out there. In terms of the Google Ads side of things, we really dialed things back and then became a lot more targeted and specific. So the main challenge around the Google Ads side of things was just rising costs when it comes to Google Ads. So we've seen the costs go up by about 25 to 30% year on year for the last 3 years. And this has been going on for quite some time. So a big part of it is looking to the account and then seeing where are we actually driving profitability and where are we making sales, but not necessarily getting that same type of margin. And then really focusing on ways that you can focus on, say, top performer campaigns, while then kind of excluding advertising on the areas where it just didn't make as much commercial sense. From a social side of things, there was two objectives. One was around driving targeted ads to potential customers, but the other one was actually around driving people in store to their partner location to then see one of their aestheticians or around, getting like a free treatment or an assessment done. The reason that was important is that when we look at a brand like that, one part is sales, but a second part is actually around driving up the brand affinity and the brand engagement and loyalty. So yeah, the difference that we find when we're working with the bigger brands is a lot of the time, a part of what we look at is around sales, but a part of it is more around that kind of brand and thought leadership ownership that they have in terms of share of voice.
And talking about skincare, a lot of clinics do brand their own or have, a hero product in their brand. They pop it up on their website, and it ideally is meant to become a passive, income stream, but it tends to not be the case for most clinics. With your experience having trained Shopify and PayPal and BigCommerce, Magento, what do you recommend and how do you help clinics to increase their retail sales, especially online?
Yep. I think my answer may surprise you a little bit because it's actually, I think that the challenge is because of the competition that you're up against. Like if you've got, another serum that's targeting, say, brightening or, whatever the kind of objective is, the challenge is whether you consider this or not, realistically, your competitors are like the big aggregators and brands like, Dermalogica, Ordinary. And if you've got a range of only like, say, less than 3 products, I don't know if necessarily putting in the budget to market that online is going to be the wisest outcome, because like the outlay that you need to compete against those brands versus your potential margins and that limited product range, it just may not add up, right? So then the question is, how do I then market it? I'd say the best way is actually to then go old school, meaning look at it as that add-on when someone comes through the door. So I'll give you an example. So with Evolution Laser, our number one goal initially was to rank in position 1 for laser hair removal, Sydney, things like that. The reason is that's what brings in the volume. It is not necessarily the highest margin, but it brings in the volume. That allows us to at least have, interaction with the clinician and the end customer so that they then know and have a chance to see the brand for itself and know whether it's the right fit for them and hopefully love the brand. But that's like a fantastic opportunity for your clinician then to then upsell products. So a part of what we would then look at is products that they would sell. A part of it is other services as well. So over time, we then started targeting things like fillers and injectables. We rank pretty well there now too. Things like micro needling and microdermabrasion, things like that. But in the early days when we were primarily focused on laser hair, we would actually then still tell the client to then tell their clinicians to like drive that as a kind of just something that's brought up to at least bring up the opportunity for someone to then assess whether it's the right fit for them. I would say that, if it was me, that's probably what I'd rely on, just because the other avenue, there's things that you can do, but sometimes you need to assess like, okay, just because it can be done, does it make it worthwhile in terms of profitability? Like if I'm not actually going to make money out of it, why should I put in the budget and the effort into it? Like that's kind of my take on that.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. It's a whole nother podcast talking about skincare. You've given us so many golden nuggets today. You've given us tons of takeaways, tons of notes. Oh my goodness. Before we wrap up, are you able to give us a quick overview of what you'll be speaking on at the Aesthetic Business Masters?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll be talking about, first of all, what are the trends that are happening in digital marketing landscape just overall at the moment. I'll talk about some of the new changes. I'll talk about things like around AI. How does that relate? How do you use it? Things like that. But the main thing that we'll be talking about is actually going to be SEO. So I'm going to go through some practical examples around how SEO works, including the actual tools that we use, examples around how to apply it, and you can do it yourself, as well as like what the impact is from those types of tools. So it'll be a really, really kind of practical session that is tailored specifically for the aesthetic industry, with some examples around, what tools you can use to then practically rank your site.
Fantastic. And before we let you go, sorry, one more. Do you have a takeaway for us? If we do nothing but implement one thing, what would it be?
Hmm. That's a really tough one. It sounds really silly, but just don't neglect even just having a website, whether you're ready to market it or not. Without having that, you're really limiting the opportunity that you have to get that brand out there. So even if it's a basic site and just have that up with a contact field, I think it will be a really great way to take that first step into the industry. But that's what I would say.
Fantastic advice. And having worked on a project with your team, the branding, the website, the functionality, the advice, the support was all amazing, absolutely incredible. So we are so grateful for your time today and can't wait to see you in person in Melbourne and then Sydney.
Amazing. Thank you.
That's it for today's episode of the Aesthetic Business Masters podcast. We hope you're walking away with actionable insights and renewed confidence to elevate your clinic and your marketing. Remember, success in this industry isn't just about treatments, it's about strategy, storytelling, and staying visible. To learn more about our events, masterclasses, and speaker lineup, head to Aesthetic Business Masters. And if you loved today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. It helps more people like you discover the tools they need to thrive. For more resources, events, and behind-the-scenes content, follow us on Instagram at Aesthetic Business Masters or visit aestheticbusinessmasters.com.au. Until next time, stay curious, stay confident, and keep mastering the business of aesthetics. Be bold in business and brave in beauty. And remember, success favors the courageous. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you soon.